may know this, or maybe you don't know this, but January has really been dubbed Divorce Month. So you wonder, why do so many marriages end up fizzling, ending during January? Is it because it's the beginning of the year and you've come through the holidays, or what is it? Jacqueline Newman joins us. She's a family law attorney and a managing partner at Berkman, Bodiger, Newman, and Rod in New York City. And Jacqueline, thanks so much for joining us. Why do we see that spike in January? And traditionally, this happens every January.
Yeah, January is a really, really, really big month. And I think what happens is that a lot of people, as you had said, want to make it through the holidays. They feel that, they're not going to serve, a summons for divorce in someone's Christmas stocking. So they really want to make it through, especially when there are families and children involved. And then after that, they feel like, they've made their sacrifices and they're ready to move forward, and people want to start the new year fresh. So it's a big month of people kind of saying, we're ready to start new. We want to start talking about what this is going to look like. And, and they don't want to go through a whole other year of a dysfunctional marriage.
So what do you tell people when, and this goes to people you advise when they come to you, what's the first thing that you do when somebody comes in and they say, okay, this is it, I'm trying to get my ducks in a row, I'm out of this? What are as the attorney on the other side, and I'm sure every single case is different, obviously, what are some of the basic things that you tell somebody when they first talk to you about getting a divorce?
Well, I can say the very first question I ask someone is if they're sure they want to get divorced. It's one of my very first questions, because if somebody is not sure and they hesitate in any way, then I usually recommend that they go back, they think about it, they go to therapy, they do what they got to do, because it is such a difficult process, and you do not want to go through this unless you are absolutely sure. So that is like the number one question. Once somebody turns to me and said, yes, I am 100% sure, then I say, okay, then let's move forward. And then it really becomes a question of figuring out where the major concerns are. If there are children involved, I usually start with that, and I usually want to know what the relationships are currently, what someone would envision as a parenting access schedule once the parties are no longer living together. So we start kind of talking about what's that going to look like, because the kids are usually the most sensitive point, obviously. And so everybody wants to kind of visualize that. And I tell people, even take out a calendar. Like start, you get a lot of people that say, I want 50% of the time. And I say, well, what does that really look like? Don't get caught up in the percentages. Think about it. Like, is that going to work with your schedule? Is that going to work with these kids' schedule? A lot of these kids have a million activities. We got to really be practical and think about, from a reality standpoint, what makes sense. So I say, break out your calendar, look at what it looks like. I do these little graphs, and I kind of show people, what schedules, what possible schedules there could be. So that's really the number one thing we do in first meetings. And sometimes people aren't sure. So I say, go home, think about it. As I said, break out your calendar, look at your kids' events, and figure out what's going to work for you, your work schedule, your spouse, everyone else. So that's, I'd say, number one.
Yeah, it's interesting in listening to you. That's such sage advice. But with the people that come into the office, are you seeing any kind of a trend? Older? Is it gray divorces? Is it with kids? Is it just, I made a mistake, this is what I thought it was? Or is it just kind of a combination?
It really is a combination. I would say probably the majority of our clients, I wouldn't say we get as many gray divorces. It does occur. But more often than not, I would say our range is anywhere between, say, 35 to 55, 60. That's basically, I would say, the age range that we generally have. And a lot of the people, most people do have kids. I would say probably more often than not. Obviously, when there are no children involved, it is usually a simpler divorce, just because you're not dealing with the parenting aspect of everything else. And, children bring a lot of emotion in divorce. And so it adds a whole other layer that doesn't happen as much when there aren't children, and it becomes a little bit more of a business transaction. Yeah.
And as you're talking about a business transaction, do you find that sometimes when you do the scope, and obviously you look and you do you look financially, do you sometimes find that the person you're representing is so surprised by what pops out of the closet that they had no idea was there?
Oh, absolutely. Usually you'll have one person who is more financially savvy than the other. People still, often have designated roles in the marriage. And so you'll have one person who we say is in the financial dark, just doesn't know. And when I represent that person, they're often very surprised. Sometimes they think the person has a lot more money than they do. And other times it's opposite. Usually when it's opposite, it's a much happier conversation.
I bet it is. Of all and you've probably handled so many divorces. Of all the divorces that you've handled, what was the most unique, the trickiest to maneuver that had some wild kind of curveball to it?
Well, I've definitely had a few. I would say probably one of my most contentious, difficult cases had to do with a situation, and this is actually a public case at this point because we ended up in the Court of Appeals. But there's a situation where there were 4 children, and the father found out that the last child wasn't his.
Oh.
And so that added, as you can imagine, a huge amount of hostility and anger and hurt feelings, and the child was 5 years old.
Wow.
So, and to this man's credit, I mean, he loved his son, and he, was stepping up and, wanted to continue to have that child as his own, which a court would have done anyway. So, as much as he was being the good guy, which he was, it was going to happen anyway. Because the court will look at from the child's perspective, who the father is. But, I mean, and these people also had a ton of money, and so that, added a lot of layers to it. And, of course, from his perspective, he felt that he wouldn't have stayed in the marriage had he had known, and therefore he felt that all of the money that was earned during the marriage shouldn't be split in a normal way. So that was part of what we ended up fighting about for about 3 years.
Wow, 3 years, too. I mean, I guess that's the other thing. And in New York, and it's different everywhere, but in New York, is there a law? I know in New Jersey, don't you have to wait a year?
No longer in New York. Now that New York has turned to no fault, which happened in 2010, you no longer have to wait a year. Ooh. So now you can do a separation agreement, you can do a no-fault divorce, and people can get divorced much quicker. I mean, it's still, with the court system as it is, it may still take you a year, but technically you don't have to wait it.
Yeah, boy, what a difference that makes. So you have this happen in January, and you see the spike. What about in February? Because we have Valentine's Day. So if you don't get in your window, maybe you wait till after Valentine's Day?
Well, it is interesting because actually what happens is January is the month I'd say that we get tons of initial consultation where people come in, it's information gathering stage. So I always say January, as much as it is divorce month, I would say that it really is more information gathering month. But I would imagine, I think divorce rates actually probably spike more so of the actual filings in February. Part of it is because they're processing the information they gathered in January. I do think Valentine's Day plays some role, even though it's such a Hallmark holiday. But it does. But a lot of times, sometimes you have to make sure that someone's buying only one Valentine. So that's where people get caught a lot.
I love that. That's crazy. Always fun to have you on the show, Jacqueline Newman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, how interesting is that to listen to Jacqueline, and boy, with child custody and the issues there. I think it's great what she says in the beginning to tell people, first of all, is this exactly what you want to do? Because there may be something that happens, tension, etc., where there's no conversation. She's right, and then all of a sudden, boom, here I am, I want a divorce, and it's a hasty kind of thing, and you wonder how many people can put that back together. But the child custody and what she was talking about with the calendars and the craziness of the kids and how are you going to make that work, and not really thinking about it, just thinking, well, I want half the time and that's it, and we'll figure that out. And it's much more difficult, more complex than it maybe used to be. And there's no this is the thing, there's not like massively hard statistics on this, but boy, it sure feels like to me, and I know a lot of this can also be with the economy, even if somebody has money, that more people are getting divorced. It feels like that, and I could be completely wrong. That that whether it's the people in the window that Jacqueline said in their 30s to their 50s, and kids are involved in that, or if it's just the mistake thing or the older marriages. And looking around, I just have noticed that, and I'm sure all circumstances are certainly different. And I really do think some of that ebbs and flows with the economy. And it just makes me think of that, especially in talking with Jacqueline, makes me think of that movie, War of the Roses, which she says, how it could be a cantankerous situation. And when you're talking about divorces that go on for a couple of years, imagine, that's kind of just hanging over your head and being dragged out and all that animosity. And that's what that movie portrayed, that happens between those people. And especially when you're separating kids or assets and figuring all that out, and then finding some curveballs, some surprises along the way. But you can see why January would be divorce month, because you come through the holidays, you're not going to do that at the holidays, and then whammo. And how many people are probably blindsided with that? Interesting stuff. All right, hang with us. Much more coming your way next here on America Tonight.
is suddenly tasteless. I know I'm alone.